Can you hear me there?
John.
Good afternoon, and welcome everybody to the joint oversight hearing, Senate Veterans Affairs Committee and Assembly Veterans Affairs Committee. We're looking at today's state active duty status. What is it? Why does it exist? Are changes needed? The purpose of the hearing is to examine the use of state active duty status, or SAD, within the state of California. Is it properly being administered? If not, what changes are needed? If public trust and confidence in the California National Guard has been lost or tarnished, how can we restore it? In June of 2005, the state auditor conducted an audit of the military department, and that report of which is entitled Military Department. It has had problems with inadequate personnel management and improper organizational structure and has not met recruiting and facility maintenance requirements. The audit revealed several important findings. First, these included it has not effectively reviewed its state active duty positions, and as a result may be paying more for some positions that if they were converted to state civil service or federal positions classification. Number two, it has convened a panel to review the propriety of its 210 state active duty positions and estimates it will take 3 to 5 years to implement the panel's recommendations. Number three, it did not follow its regulations when it temporarily appointed many state active duty members to positions that did not appear to be temporary and failed to advertise some vacant positions as required and inappropriately granted an indefinite appointment to one state active duty member after he reached the mandatory retirement age. And finally, state active duty members who become whistleblowers do not have the access to an independent authority to resolve complaints alleged retaliation. This is the third hearing in a set of hearings regarding the National Guard, and although this is this joint hearing, in November of 2010, the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee held a hearing on the irregularities in the recruitment and retention program. The Senate committee held another hearing in March of 2011 regarding the issues of double dipping, promotions, and to follow up on the recruitment and retention issues. At that March 2011 hearing, witnesses came forward and raised concerns with the training base at Camp Roberts and the possibility of pension padding. It's now almost 5 years since the first audit was issued. Recently, witnesses and press have questioned many of the same issues which were addressed in that audit 5 years ago. There have been reports that members of the National Guard at the highest levels were excessively compensated, that misappropriations of money have occurred, and that there have been various payroll irregularities, and continuing to questions of favoritism in hiring practices. The committees here today plan to gain a full understanding of the state active duty program, probe the Guard's responses to audit recommendations, and begin to explore some of the allegations brought forward in recent months. Additionally, the committees plan to set milestones for progress and future reports back by the Guard to the legislature. The committees anticipate that further hearings will be necessary for exploration and monitoring of these issues and to give time for the seeds of solution to come to fruition. Mr. Cook.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, we have a pretty extensive agenda today. I'm in the position, it's kind of like deja vu all over again. When I retired, the last thing I was doing was I was the IG of the base inspector general. I was a colonel. And it's a very, very tough job because sometimes you don't make many friends when you come in and you're looking at things, and usually it's in response to an allegation that's such and such a thing has happened, or regulations haven't been followed, or SOP, standard operating procedures, are out of date or incorrect. But it's a job that I think is extremely important, and just as this job is, because there's been some serious allegations made that can seriously undermine the morale, the training, the effectiveness, and the combat readiness of the whole Guard, particularly in the eyes and the minds of the troops that are members of this organization. So to do this, we want to do it right. We want to the best of our ability, I think, find out, what has happened, what is wrong, why certain recommendations made by the audit were not carried through. And, of course, most important, if there are problems from a procedural standpoint, a regulation standpoint, or how we do it, then how can we change it to make a better organization? Because, you're in a very, quite frankly, deadly business. People out there in the audience, you've been to Iraq, Afghanistan, and it's extremely important that we have the leadership and, as I said, the training and the troops that are fully committed to be part of this organization. So I think I appreciate everybody participating in this today. Some of the questions might rub people the wrong way, and I hope they don't, but I think our purpose, is very clear-cut. We're trying to get to the bottom of some of these things and hopefully make it a little better. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Any other members wish to make any opening remarks? Very good. Brigadier General David Baldwin, welcome, sir. And if I can ask you to please make some opening remarks. And welcome, sir. Congratulations on your appointment.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Mr. Cook, members. Thank you. I'm Brigadier General David Baldwin, the Adjutant General and Commander of the California National Guard. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss with you today the State Active Duty System. What I'd like to talk about is an overview and explain why California has a State Active Duty System, because it is unique to just about all the other 53 states and territories that have a National Guard. I then want to talk to you about what some of the problems that I see with the National Guard, with the State Active Duty System, and then finally map out the path ahead of the things that I have either taken steps already done to fix the program or things that I intend to do to fix the program. And then I'm going to discuss some areas that I could use your help and the help of the governors to further address and improve this system. California has the State Active Duty System as a unique tool to improve its National Guard and to improve the readiness of the military department, because California is unique amongst the 53 states and territories, as you all well know. Our State Active Duty System is designed to meet California's needs. It evolved in an outgrowth just prior to World War II, when California determined that it needed to augment its own state defense forces beyond the resources that were provided by the federal military because of the unique size and geography of California. The preponderance of our State Active Duty workforce, or about 40% of the 547 State Active Duty members, have duties that are either directly related or of tangential benefit to our state emergency response. And we have, in the resident of the California National Guard, hands down, bar none, the best emergency response capability of any of the other 53 states and territories. It's a response capability that's been born through the crucible of hard and tried and true response to real live, very serious disasters and man-caused events here in the state. Our California National Guard is the most heavily tasked National Guard for state emergency response of any in the nation. And there have been some years when our California National Guard was called out by the governor to respond more times than all of the other 53 states and territories combined. The state active duty system that we have, the legislature saw the value in that, and over those years provided resources to us in order to create additional capability that is not resident in the other states that has proven to be very, very effective. And you can kind of sum it up with the California National Guard in 2007 responded in less than 4 hours to the call of the governor during the 2007 wildfires down in San Diego. Compare that to the response of states like Louisiana in the wake of Hurricane Katrina that do not have a state active duty force. So we have provided an investment in California and its National Guard in order to provide a tremendous capability that other states don't have. In addition to our emergency response capability, we use state active duty in California for other programs that require military-specific skills. Those programs include our youth programs, where we have resident and non-resident academies that help disadvantaged youth or youth that we want to put on a path to college education or college preparation. And those mentorship and coaching of those youth requires military people because they're military academies. The value of our state active duty system is to draw in soldiers and airmen from the National Guard or our state military reserve that can provide role models. And the effectiveness of these programs has been proven time and time again because we constantly win the national awards for in competitions with the other states. And year after year, our youth programs are highlighted as being the best in the country. That's part and parcel because we have a state active duty system. In addition, a unique program we have in California is the Military Funerals Honors Program, which this committee in earlier incantations helped us create and devise in order to render military honors to veterans after they've died, because the ability of the federal government in California to provide those services, which is an entitlement that the veteran earned and their families deserve, was lost with the closure of many military bases. We do thousands and thousands of veterans funeral honors every year, and we're able to do that because we have a veterans funeral honor program with soldiers and airmen that are on state active duty that render honors to those veterans after they pass on. We also have programs like the Temporary Emergency Shelter Program that we run through state active duty, where we house during the winter months thousands of homeless people that don't have anywhere else to go in our armories. So those are examples of why we have a state active duty program. It is very, very effective. Now, some people may ask, well, why can't you use state civil servants to do those jobs? In many cases you can, and we're taking a hard look on a case-by-case basis at each of the positions. And is it more appropriate because it's more cost-effective, or because the incumbent in the position may have longer time in that position? We are transitioning positions to state civil service. However, there are unique roles for state active duty why it's more appropriate for a military member to have that job. We go through a process where we examine each position, and the positions that require military-specific training, or positions like the youth programs one where you need to be a uniformed member, positions where it may require the incumbent in the job to be armed, positions that require 24/7 no-notice recall, or positions that might be unique in nature that require the person to fall under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, where we have to be able to give hard and fast orders in life and death situations. Those we deem to be appropriate to be state active duty. And through our review, we found that we need about 500 to 600 of those people in order to get the job done. Of those 547 state active duty service members that we currently have, only 155 of them are paid for by the general fund. The rest are reimbursed by the federal trust fund. And so the federal government has determined, and through a master cooperative agreement we have with the Guard Bureau, the federal government has determined that those positions and that those requirements are of value, and that they approve of us bringing state active duty people on and are reimbursing us for those jobs. Our general fund budget is only $44 million, so we're talking about 0.0005% of our state's budget. That in turn delivers tremendous capability and value and return on that investment in the form of our emergency response, which, as I stated before, is hands down, bar none, the best in the country. Our youth programs, which are the best in the country. Our Veterans Funeral Honors Program, which is unmatched and provides that entitlement to the families of deceased veterans. I want to talk a little bit about, after talking about the value of the state active duty system, is what I think is wrong with the state active duty system. Our internal procedures and internal regulations are out of date. There are some cumbersome rules. There are some loopholes that people can take advantage of. And I've directed my staff that we're beginning a review process of our regulation to review all those things and tighten those up. There's no career management system in the state active duty system. On the federal active duty side, when you go into active duty, they have career paths laid out for people to take them from a brand new commissioned officer or a young sergeant and get them up to sergeant major, or get the young officer up to become a colonel or a general officer. On ours, there is no career management system. It's just done by force of will for the people that want to succeed, and I want to change that. I want to provide guidelines so that our boards that meet and the processes that we've already established in order to select people for positions have guidance and guidelines that they use to make sure that we're picking the right people, while concurrently working to make sure that we're taking into account the diversity of our force, so our senior leaders are reflective in gender and ethnic makeup of the vast diversity that we have in our junior ranks. We need to do a full-time manning review within the military department, which I've already directed to begun. Now, this is not just limited to our state active duty system, but I'm doing it also with our state civil servants, our federal service servants, and our federal active duty positions that we have within the department. We have about 6,000 full-time people in the military department. Of those, only 600 or 10% are on state active duty. The preponderance are either federal technicians, which are uniform-wearing personnel that are paid through the federal civil service system, or they're active guard and reserve military members, which means they're on federal active duty but still under the command and control of the governor. I think that we're lopsided on where those resources are applied. We're top-heavy in the organization. We have a lot of people that are doing functions that I don't necessarily deem to be critical or important. So we're taking a look at across the entire spectrum of our system to determine that we're putting the resources first in the right place, and then secondly that we're using the right type of job system. I think we have 7 different job systems that you can be in as a member of the military department, because it's a very complex organization due to both our federal and our state character of the organization. But I also want to make sure that we're using the right tool to get the job done. So for example, we've already begun looking at shifting some people that were on state active duty in more senior positions that were doing functions that could be performed by a federal person, shifting them over to an area where it's more appropriate to use state resources and replacing them for a federal person. We have other people that are slated to retire. When they retire, we may take those functions out altogether and use that money for something else that within the department, for example, improving our facilities infrastructure. We're also taking a much more aggressive approach as positions become vacant through attrition in the state active duty system to replace state active duty people with state civil servants. We have something like 200 people of our state active duty force that work within the facilities arena, doing things like heavy equipment operator, or they might be plant operators or things like that. There are many of those positions that I deem that can be converted to state civil service. I know that your questions will be how many have done in the past. I don't have those data yet. However, I will tell you that when that audit came out in 2006 and I was the director of operations, the very first state active duty position became vacant in my directorate, became vacant because I fired the person for non-performance. I took that position, which was a military position, and converted it to state civil service, because I took what the recommendations in that audit to heart and thought that it was fiscally prudent and more effective, not just cost effective, but more effective for my organization to change it. So I've proven that it can be done. It wasn't that difficult to do, and I will ensure that the rest of the organization takes that tack and we continue to do that. Some other things that I've already done to improve the SAD system, I've launched 30 separate audits and investigations into allegations that have come either through the public or through our own internal reporting systems of alleged improprieties by members of not just the state active duty system but in the military department as a whole. Those include investigations into general officer dual compensation, where general officers that were serving on state active duty had an allegation that they were not in the proper leave or pass status when they went onto federal duty and got paid. It's allowed by our regulations that members on state active duty, when they serve in their federal capacity in the National Guard, they can take leave just like any other civil servant or police officer can take leave from their full-time state job and go on to federal duty and get dual compensated. However, they have to be in the right leave or pass status from their state job, and we're doing an audit to ensure that that was done properly. I extended that audit also to include...
Excuse me, General, if I may. You mentioned you have 30 different audits you're working on right now. Who's performing those audits?
It's a combination. I was going to say pretty much everyone, Senator. We have, it goes from the hard end of the spectrum of the U.S. Attorney and a federal task force looking into student loan repayment programs issues and incentive bonus issues. The Air Force Office of Special Investigation is involved down at the 144th Fighter Wing. We have our federal inspector general in our department, who's an active Army colonel that is working on a number of them. We have a state internal review office, which is our internal state civil service auditors that are doing several of them. I've appointed, using my command authority, several investigating officers to conduct those. Just some specific examples, and I'll take three, for example. The Department of Personnel Administration and the State Controller's Office are doing the audits into the past two adjutants generals to make sure that their time and attendance was recorded properly. So that's for Major General Wade and Major General Kite. For our general officers within our department, I asked our civilian auditors to take a look at that, and they're doing a quick response audit for the general officers. And then because I thought it was prudent and in the name of transparency, I directed an audit of myself, my own personal records, and the records of my top two leaders, Colonel Robert Spano and Colonel Matt Beavers, who are the Director of the Joint Staff and the Assistant Adjutant General, respectively, within our organization. I directed that I appointed an officer from the Air National Guard to do an investigation of the three of us. It's an audit to ensure that we ourselves properly coded our time and attendance over the past 3 years.
So you would say then the individuals, entities performing those audits, you essentially have outsiders looking and helping perform those audits as well?
Everyone, with the exception of the last guy that I just mentioned, are either completely outside agencies or they are entities that have reporting requirements by statute or by their governing regulations that if they find an impropriety, particularly if it relates to the person of me or my behavior, that they're obligated to report outside of the agency. So, for example, our state auditors are obligated by statute that if they find an impropriety that the department is not addressing, then they must report it to the Bureau of State Audits and to the legislature. Let
me interrupt you with another question. And we started talking about double dipping state active duty status. It's my understanding when you're on SAD, state active duty status, you're being paid for 24 hours. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So I'm trying to get a clear picture here of you're beginning to talk about you can get paid federal side if you leave one and go to the other. But I guess my question is, can you get paid for both at the same time?
You can, but you have to be in the proper, just like any other state civil servant, you can leave your job if you're on state active duty. You can leave your state job, go into a military leave status, or take your own personal vacation time when you get ordered to duty by the National Guard to perform your federal duty.
So then once you're doing that, you're leaving your SAD 24-hour status and going to a completely different one. So you're not doing not getting paid at the same time for both simultaneously.
Well, you would be getting paid, but you're burning up vacation time or military leave time. So what you're not allowed to do is you're not allowed to be in a duty status on both jobs at the same time because you can't be doing both jobs simultaneously.
Thank you. Please continue.
Ask a quick thought.
Mr.
Oh, okay.
Flip a coin. Go ahead.
Flip a coin. Well, so so you indicated that you can get paid if essentially you're using vacation or leave time. How much vacation and leave time does a typical officer
A state active duty member is authorized 30 days of military leave, and then they accrue 2.5 days of personal leave, we call annual leave, per month, just like they would do on federal active duty. Oh. The state active duty system is the compensation system is modeled, actually it's directed by law to mirror the federal active duty system identically, with the exception of this provision for military leave. And the reason that exception is active duty, federal active duty personnel only have one job. Most of our state active duty people have two jobs. They have their state job that they're performing on state active duty, but they're simultaneously members of California's National Guard, and they have their go-to-war job, if you will, in a unit that will require them duties above and beyond their state position. For example, when I was the operations officer on state active duty for the state of California, I was concurrently commanding an infantry brigade combat team that was preparing to mobilize soldiers to go overseas to Iraq. That was like a traditional National Guard job that I would take when I was performing those duties. I would take leave from my full-time job because I had to go do this completely separate job.
But so just to clarify, though, so you get the 30 days of military leave, or is that, and then
That's correct.
And that's paid additional leave, even
Right.
though that would also be paid by the federal government because you're now also on national
just like,
duty.
Right, just like for any other state civil servant or police officer or firefighter, the state has made a decision to continue to compensate because it is often a hardship, and many of our people lose money when they go to their federal jobs based on their state job.
Okay, so basically in the same way that we may, let's say a police officer who's also in the National Guard, correct?
That's correct.
Would also have 30 days of
Yes.
state, or CHP officer, I guess.
That's
in
correct.
this case, would have 30 days of military leave if they were in the National Guard. That's what state active duty officers have. That's what you're trying
Yes,
to
sir.
explain to me. Okay,
That's
thank you.
correct. And then you also have the option of using your vacation time, which the demands on our National Guard members now are for their part-time traditional National Guard job usually exceed, especially if they're in a leadership role, those 60 days, because it takes so much time and energy to prepare a unit for combat.
Okay.
Many of us have spent over the last 10 years taken a lot of leave without pay because we've exceeded the 60 days and had to take leave without pay, just like many soldiers and airmen that work at Walmart or in the CHP or are self-employed have to leave their jobs in order to make their units ready to go fight.
But you make full pay during that military leave, not just the difference between what you might be losing between.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Just like any other state employee.
Okay.
Mr. Liu.
Yeah. Now, General Wade allegedly had days far excess of those 30. He had many days where he got dual compensation, and he, I believe, read the law in such a way that he thought he was allowed to do that. Do you believe that what he did was allowable, or was it wrong?
And we're still in negotiations with DPA. What I'd like to answer, Senator, is what I'm going to do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to limit myself to only the 30 days of military leave. And even though our lawyers believe that I could take my personal leave and use that if I wanted to go on to federal duty and double dip, I will not do that. Because I think 30 days for an adjutant general is more than enough, because I'm one of the few people on state active duty that only has one job. My federal job as the adjutant general in the National Guard is the duties are concurrent with my job as the adjutant general as the director of the state military department.
And then if I could go back to some of your earlier comments about what the state active duty does as a whole. So some states, as you know, I believe New York and Texas have 2
Right.
total state active duty people. And we're about to release 33,000 prisoners from our state prisons. And sort of in these lean budgetary times, if you had to, let's say, eliminate some positions, of those state active duty folks, how many actually do core functions such as disaster preparedness, and how many deal with homeless shelters, which is a nice
Sure.
thing, or these military academies, which are a nice thing, but they don't strike me as a core function that when we have a massive budget deficit we ought to be funding.
I can give you the percentage breakdown.
Okay.
For emergency response, it's 40%. And the 3 full-time people that we have with the temporary emergency shelter program or the homeless program are included in that figure, because we consider that an emergency mission. 5% of them do veterans funeral honors. 21% of them work in our youth programs. 14% work in our facilities. So that would be the emergency response in the facilities would certainly be a critical core function. And then command and control, which has a critical element because you have to maintain good order and discipline, and have people in charge of a military organization. It's about 20% of that force.
Great. Thank you.
Sir.
Mr. Chairman, go ahead.
Yeah, going back to the leave again, I'm trying to to understand this, that in some cases somebody's going to get 60 days of leave a year if they are in this capacity. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Well, your average active duty person's only going to get 30 days a year.
Yes, but the average active duty person doesn't have to take 30 days of their leave to go do their military job or go to combat. So when I went to combat, I was on military leave from this job, on leave, but in combat. And that's the difference. That's the purpose of that military leave, is to either prepare use your time to prepare yourself when you go on additional training for your National Guard unit, when you're doing, if you're a pilot, you might be doing additional flight training, or you can also use it when you're operationally deployed.
Okay. Let me ask you a question. Have there been any allegations of basket leave?
I'm sorry?
Basket leave, are you familiar with that term?
No, sir.
Where somebody, a commander says, well, okay, just take off a few days or what have you. We'll have leave papers written up on you, and then we'll rip it up so it's never entered into the system. And with everything that's going on, I'm a little bit concerned about who has the authority to oversee all these policies which are in question right now. And I'm saying, if we're not sure about our senior officers, are we ensuring that there hasn't been an abuse? Because you can use that for certain advantages. Oh yeah, you can have the week off, you can have a few days off. We'll cover you, we'll write the leave papers, and then if you we'll just rip them up and they're never entered in the system, so they're not charged against you. Because when it goes 30 days for 1 year and then it's carried over the next year, it goes all the way up to 60 days unless it's changed.
Right.
And you're starting to get expensive if you're talking about. So you haven't heard of any of these allegations or anything like that?
No, I've heard of that. That issue can happen in the active component, just like.
Well, that's why I'm.
So here's how we're addressing that, because what I was going to do is answer your question by describing a worse problem. But let me come to that. Because first and foremost, the question of the ethical culture and climate within the organization is fundamentally a question of leadership. All of the issues that you hear about in the National Guard, we're addressing very aggressively by changing the leadership. And we're picking leaders that I know are serving under the principle that I espouse in my command philosophy of selfless service. First and foremost, that's job one that I feel that I have, and one of the reasons that I got appointed by this governor was to restore that notion of selfless service, that the people that are putting on the uniform are putting on the uniform because they want to serve, they want to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and that of the state of California, and serve selflessly because they want to get the mission done and they want to take care of their fellow soldiers and airmen, not because they want to make a quick buck for themselves. So we've been very, very aggressive about espousing that. And then on the flip side of that is when people don't adhere to that policy, we take them to task for it and hold them accountable, whether it's through counselings on the softer end, up to and included taking formal disciplinary action under the Uniform Code of Military Justice against them to nip that off in the past. Now back to your question about basket leave. That's the way that I can address the problem of unethical supervisors that are cutting deals with their subordinates by not reporting leave. But we have a structural problem in the way that we administer our state active duty timesheets. We still do manual timesheets in our full-time state active duty system, if you can believe that, in 2011. To me, that's insane. And the problem with that is because we have a manual system, you turn your timesheet in on something like the 18th or the 20th of the month. So you can go you turn in a timesheet on the 20th of the month that says you're going to be on duty for the rest of the month. And then through no fault of your own, even if you're not an unethical person, you just happen to be somebody that is a very busy person, you get called to duty by your National Guard unit as opposed to your full-time job. You get called to duty by your National Guard unit, you go on orders. The system may not capture the fact that you are on orders because our federal system right now does not talk to the state system. When I was a young lieutenant in this program, we had a manual system where they manually would provide, the federal people would provide paper to the state people, so we had systems of checks and balances to correct any issues like the one that I just discussed, where you change your status after you've turned in your timesheet. So I've ordered that we immediately re-implement that system, because somewhere along the line, the way it fell off the wayside. What I've also done is that our personnel and financial people had devised an automated system to fix the problems with our state emergency response payrolls, where we're calling up thousands of soldiers and putting them onto state duty. They automated that system. I directed them, automate the full-time system too, and make sure that that full-time system on the state side talks to the federal system and has input, so it's automatic. If somebody changes their duty status, the computer and the system automatically catch it. So we'll work through 3 different layers in order to make sure that we don't have fraud, whether it's deliberate or whether it's inadvertent fraud within our time and accounting system. First is that we're going to have this computerized system to work. Secondly is we're going to imbue everyone with a sense of selfless service and hold people accountable so that they do things the right way. And if they don't do things the right way, after we give them due process, I have to say that because my lawyer's in the room, then we hammer them if they did something wrong or if they did something illegally. And then the third pillar of that is we're making more robust our internal controls programs on both the federal and the state side in order we have better oversight within the department. On the federal side, we are authorized 15 internal review people. Only 2 slots are filled. So one of the things I did in the first 30 days was direct a shifting of federal resources to immediately hire 8 more auditors on the federal side, so we can, 5 times, it's more than quadruple the number of auditors that we have on the federal side. On the state side, because our state resources is a little more constrained, we currently have 2 full-time auditors. That's woefully inadequate. So I directed that we find a resource, whether it's a state active duty or state civil service resource, and instead of filling them for whatever its designated position, divert that to hire and announce a state civil servant auditor so we can increase by 1/3 our auditing capacity.
Thank you. Go
Just
ahead.
one real quick.
Please.
And I show my ignorance here because it's been a long time since I've done the signing off on pay issues, leave issues, or things like that. But even 100 years ago when I left the Marine Corps, we were doing it electronically. Mm-hmm. And if I understand you correctly, at least on the state side, we're still doing it manually?
Yes, sir.
Which, God, it just seems like, in terms of doing reviews electronically, it's much easier to find your errors. You need the documentation to put it in and everything like that. Is that perhaps part of the problem when some of the things that we're looking at in terms of the procedures that have to be modernized?
I think it's a contribute to the problem. I think the root cause problem is that the organization lost its way ethically and morally, and that we're fixing that through leadership. And there's no other way to fix it other than through leadership. I want to just continue on, if I could.
Just, General, if I may, Mr. Liu, Senator Liu has a
Thank you. So I just wanted
question.
Well, first, let me just start by saying I commend you for your service to the nation, to this state, and you were at the tip of the spear in Afghanistan, and I commend you for doing that. I just wanted to sort of maybe challenge you on your thing about leadership. I think you might be underestimating the problem to view it just as a leadership issue. I think there are probably systemic things that need to be fixed outside of leadership. In 2005, it was like 6 years ago, the state auditor came out and said state active duty members who become whistleblowers do not have access to an independent authority to resolve complaints of alleged retaliation. Then Senator Tom Umberg brought a bill to establish a separate IG. General Wade opposed it. Bill died. Something else that happens on active duty, I think Colonel Cook can speak to this. When someone does something wrong, the punishment is swift and it's public and people know. I don't understand why there haven't been court-martials of any of this stuff that we've seen. And wanted to know if you're looking at any of the timelines in just terms of discipline, that people understand if they do something wrong, they will get punished and people will know about it. And those to me seem more like systemic changes, because I'm confident you'll do a great job, but one day you will leave. And we just want to make sure that the next person who comes in has systems in place that these things don't reoccur. Because every time I come to a hearing, I get surprised by the information I get, because I'm now looking at something I think Senator Carrillo asked about later, about dual compensation of folks that took money in excess of hundreds of thousands of dollars that they probably shouldn't have. And so just want to ask your views on sort of the systemic changes.
Sure. Let me address three different things that I think you brought up in your question. I'll address the recommendation, that one recommendation from the audit. I'm going to address what we've done since I've come in to, while giving people due process, to begin to take steps to, if necessary, punish people, and the steps that we've taken until we can officially punish them if they're guilty, the steps that we've taken to address the wrongdoing that we've seen. And then finally, I'd like to talk about the things that I could use the help of the legislature to fix that are some structural problems with both the statutes and the way we administer the SAD program. First, with the recommendation. Subsequent to that 2005 recommendation, General Wade, who is the Adjutant General at the time, at the same time the Umber bill did not make it through the legislature, directed, independent of that bill, directed that we appoint a state active duty officer to be a state military department inspector general that is modeled, his duties and responsibilities are modeled almost identically to what our federal inspector general is, with the exception is that both those officers serve as a member of the adjutant general staff. The federal IG is a member of my staff. He's appointed, though, by the Department of the Army Inspector General to come into our organization to serve as a sounding board for me, an ethical advisor. He is a he can accept anonymous complaints, and he can also do inspections and audits and help us in that arena. General Wade created a position on the state side that does the exact same thing. The exception is that that person reports to the Adjutant General and does not have any regulatory or statutory obligation to report to anyone else. So ostensibly, if there's wrongdoing on the part of the Adjutant General or me, that person will go to the governor's office to get that adjudicated. On the issue of what we've done since we took command, the day that I was appointed, I directed that everyone that was in a line leadership position, meaning someone that was held authority over either people or budgets or fiscal resources, the first day I directed that everyone that was under investigation by either the U.S. Attorney, our Criminal Investigation Detachment, the Office of Special Investigation, or any other of the investigations that were going into criminal or fraudulent activity were suspended of their duties. So on the first day, we suspended 20 or 30 people of their duties. We're still affording them due process. Of those, also my subordinate, Brigadier General Currier, who's the new commander of the Army National Guard, gave what we call a 15-day letter to about 25 members of our recruiting command. They serve full-time on active duty, and the provisions of the active duty regulation are that you can remove them from active duty, in effect fire them, with 15 days notice. So he issued those letters right after we came in order to put them on notice that we intend to take action. It doesn't mean that we're going to fire them. It means that they have to come back and explain themselves. Now, it's been more than 15 days, but that's because their defense attorneys have asked for extensions, and the lawyers are working that on the due process side for what is allowable and reasonable there. I have already announced publicly that for anyone that took money improperly from either the federal government or the state government, we're going to recoup the money. Now, we understand that that's going to cause hardships for some of the people that may not have done it through misbehaving or illegally. They just did it because they misunderstood the regulations, or someone that may have been nefarious convinced them that it was okay to take this money. We're going to take that money back. We'll work with the people also that did not have any criminal intent in doing that to help ease them through the hardship, because in some cases we're talking about tens of thousands of dollars, and people may lose their homes, their cars and things like that. But unfortunately, it doesn't matter. You can't take money from the state or the federal government that you're not due, and we're going to recoup that money. The third thing that I want to talk about is things that we can do to fix. There is quite a bit of things that I can do within my own power and authority as the Adjutant General to make permanent and lasting changes within our state active duty regulation. The regulation has some clumsy sections that are poorly written. For example, the leave and pass section is very poorly written in my mind. The commander has the authority to grant a pass, a special pass, just like on active duty if you want to give them a 4-day weekend or something like that. it's not clear, and we're going to clarify that language. There are provisions that we're going to put in to reinforce the way that we hire people, to make sure that we do objective hiring boards, which right now we do a pretty good job. I want to strengthen that, and the way that we do career management. The leave and pass one is especially important issue because one of the things people don't understand, I think, was something lost on the culture. When you're on state active duty, the difference between a state civil servant and state active duty is when a state civil servant, when 4:30 in the afternoon comes around, they just go home. When 4:30 comes around and for a state active duty person, they go home only because their commander is granting them a pass to allow them to go home, because we're not obligated to let the soldiers and airmen leave. They can work 365 days out of the year, and when they do go home on weekends, when they go home in the evenings, they're going home in that status because we're granting them a pass. We need to clarify that language and reinforce and instill in the people that we have that authority over them. The things that I could use to help with the legislature. First, very broad brush is we're going to begin working with your staff and with the governor's staff to do a revamp of the military portion of the Military and Veterans Code. There's a lot of our authorizing statutes that need to be updated. They were written in the 20s or the 30s, in some cases the 40s, that we need to modernize and clarify, and will help in turn enable us to do a better job of rewriting our regulations so that they're more effective. The second, and a specific example, is there's a section in the Military and Veterans Code called 167, Section 167, which the governor or I can appoint people onto state active duty under the authority of that code. That code grants them tenure, and as such allows them to stay on state active duty until age 60. And the problem with that is that it becomes very difficult to remove non-performers, even for cause, under the provisions of that code. And cleaning that language up, I don't have a specific proposal yet, but I'm going to direct my staff to work with your staff and with the governor's office in order to clarify that language. Will help us do a better job of managing the SAD system. The final problem, which is a tough one to bring up in austere fiscal times, and we need to work with the governor's staff on this one also, is our state active duty retirement system we used to have a separate state active duty system, retirement system, that was modeled after the federal active duty system. Sometime in the last 30 years, we converted our state active duty person to PERS retirement. So our state active duty retirement is managed by PERS. The problem with this system is it's graduated. Your retirement amount of money you get for retirement is graduated according to your age. So there's a benefit the longer that you stay in service, the more money that you're going to make. So if you have a person appointed under 167 of the Military and Veterans Code, they have an incentive to stay until age 60. The problem with that is most of us lose our federal recognition as commissioned officers in the National Guard of the United States, either the Army or the Air National Guard, when we're in our late 40s, early 50s, and then we have the ability to continue on state active duty until age 60. Now, there are some benefits. You get people that are more experienced and have been around longer, but a disadvantage is that the longer you've been out of the National Guard, yet still serving in the military department, you start to become disconnected with the current realities of what our soldiers and airmen are facing as they prepare to go off and fight and win our wars. So we may need some help in addressing that.
Excuse me for a minute. Question, sir?
Yes. Just to clarify, because when Senator Lieu brought up the report asking for an independent inspector general, you relayed the history of what your predecessor did. But what's your position on an independent inspector general? Is that something you would welcome, that we revive that kind of legislation? I'm
not cleared for position yet from the governor's office, but I will tell you there are many provisions in the senator's bill that we find very attractive.
All right. I appreciate that. And I guess the second question is that I appreciate your efforts at culture change. I think, that's, while we can talk about specifics, culture change is very important. And you certainly have outlined the steps you've taken to date. What's been the response from your department to, clearly that's some people are being affected and shaking up and so forth, but is there relief? Is there people resisting? What's, from your leadership post, how do you view that people are taking your efforts to change the culture, which I think has been in place for a while?
The response to me has been overwhelmingly positive. Now, you have to take that with a grain of salt, sure, because, of course, people, I hope they don't believe that they have to do this, but they tend to tell me what I want to hear. especially then I become a general officer. But I try to be very, very direct and candid with people. As a matter of fact, it's a tenet of my command philosophy. Is my expectation is that our subordinate leaders will be tough, truthful, and candid in dealing with their subordinates, and I expect the same in return. And we have gotten very, very positive feedback in the main. Now, it's good that you used the word relief. There is relief going on, and those are the people that are not like-minded. We're relieving them and sending them on the road. But it's been overwhelming. It's been positive. Soldiers and airmen are excited about the change. It's time that we transform the Guard, and they're excited to be part of it.
Let me add, General, that your comments about pursuing those funds that may have been improperly paid to some individuals, I applaud you in those efforts, and I do have right now, just to tell you, we'll be working with you. Just received back some Ledge Council language, and we'll be helping you with legislation to extend the statute of limitations and recovering fraudulently obtained funds from 3 years to 6 years. So we'll be supporting you in those efforts. And you're right, there may be some unintended consequences, and some of those individuals that maybe didn't intend to do that, and hopefully work with those individuals as well. But we will be helping you in the general bigger picture to do your job.
Yes, sir, I appreciate that. And the only closing comment to the comments that I wanted to prepare before we start the real questions was I'm very much looking forward to working with the members directly, and I've already directed my staff to be very, very forthcoming with you and your staffs to keep you informed of what we're doing, what changes we're making, and then more importantly, what help we can use from you to continue to improve the National Guard.
Thank you very much. Questions? Ms. Yamato.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, I wanted to also just take a moment to thank you all for your leadership, not only in pulling this joint hearing together, but also on the proposed legislation, and also welcome and congratulate our new Adjutant General. You know, in much the same way as legislators come to a new assignment, you know, I use the phrase, well, this may not be our fault, but it's our responsibility. What additional steps do you think you are personally and professionally taking to, you know, to give the signal that this is a change? I mean, we have a new governor, we have a new adjutant general. I know you've already articulated some of that, but the fact that the gentleman who led, you know, a couple of adjutant generals ago, who's now, a deputy commander somewhere in NATO. I mean, I would assume that's considered a promotion. How are we going to reinforce to the troops, if you will, that perhaps alleged ill behavior does not result in getting promoted, but actually being held accountable?
I believe in leading from the front and leading by example. Most leaders in the Army will write down their command philosophy and post it to a web page or portal someplace. Instead, I believe in living my command philosophy, and I do that by spending the preponderance of my time outside the office, and I spend as much time outside the office as I can, by going out to visiting our soldiers and airmen where they work. I went to the border this last Friday. I went down to an assembly called in all of my senior leaders to have a meeting, to meet face-to-face with them, and I visited 2 of our 5 flying wings where I assembled all the members of all the airmen that are in that wing in order so they could hear from my lips to their ear my command philosophy and the 4 tenets of my command philosophy, which include selfless service, and it also includes holding people accountable. That's the first thing. The second thing is we are holding people accountable, and we're making that public within our organization, that if people commit some wrongdoing, first we're going to have a presumption of innocence and allow them to defend themselves. We're going to give them due process. But if we find in the end of the day that they did do something wrong, we're going to punish them appropriately. After we punish them, if the error of their ways is not a fatal flaw, we dust them off, put them back in the full upright lock position, and let them continue with their career and coach and mentor them back to being good contributing soldiers and airmen. If it is a fatal flaw, then we're going to get rid of them, whether it's bad enough to put them in jail or simply remove them from service.
Well, I did note some symbolism here that you're appearing as an individual here. As in some past hearings, people have been surrounded and flanked and that's fine too. I'm not saying that that's not a good representation, but I always keep an eye out for those who, are able to stand up on their own. And so certainly our office, we, have a very open door philosophy. Colonel Cook and I are neighbors on the 5th floor, and I'm very happy to serve. This is my 3rd year on the Veterans Affairs Committee, and I have a deep and abiding concern not only certainly for the active military, but how the consequences of some of this kind of, I would say, breach of trust or breach of confidence has repercussions when people leave the military. And that remains my primary focus, on ensuring that those who have served receive all the benefits to which they're entitled. So I look forward to continuing to work with you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Certainly appreciate what you're trying to do in terms of changing the culture and addressing many of the issues that have been brought up. One of the things that would be helpful is that in terms of getting a sense of timelines, you certainly mentioned, for example, the 30 audits that you're doing. I think that it'd be helpful to have a sense of, when they're going to be completed. We've made references to who's going to, who's doing the audit, how independent they may be, and who they're reporting to, and then what the anticipated actions would be. Also, in terms of your efforts to try to, and I agree with you. Everyone deserves presumption of innocence and due process. But I think that it's important to also have a set of timelines about the transformation that you're trying to lead as to when actions will be taken, so that there's appropriate expectations that people are going to be held accountable. It's not that someone can just sort of outlast or outsit the basically outsit the current adjutant general.
Right.
So I think it's going to, so that would be certainly be very helpful to have a better understanding of your timeline in terms of trying to address many of the issues that you've brought up and we've discussed here as well.
Sure. I'll start with an anecdote. When I first got appointed, my judge advocate general, or the lawyer, the JAG officer, came in and was laying out this litany of problems, that are challenges that we're going to face our new leadership team as we came in. They said, it's going to take a long time to fix all this stuff. I said, yeah, at least 10 days. Now, of course, that's hyperbole, but we are attacking them very aggressively. First of all, on the timeline, many of the investigations are being done by outside agencies that I, of course, have no control over.
Sure.
We have some sensing of when they're going to get to do it. For example, the Office of Special Investigation for the Air Force that's doing the 144 Fighter Wing compensation status investigation is nearing completion, and we expect to have the results within the next couple of weeks. With the U.S. Attorney, we have appointed a liaison from our office, and I stood up a task force to do a parallel audit, parallel to their investigation, but there's only so much evidence that they can share with us, and they are being very, very methodical and very deliberate in their investigation of this case into the Army National Guard fraud, and I don't have a sense of the timeline of when that will be complete. Now, for the audits investigations that we've directed, we are executing them with due haste, but while at the same time being diligent and affording people due process. I will tell you the one result that I do know is that they, after the cursory audit of my records, it looks like there is a problem, and I think the federal government owes me money, which I won't accept if that's the case. If I didn't collect it the first time, I'm not going to go back and ask for the money. But that one I just ordered last week, and they were able to turn that around in a week. So it really depends on the particular nature. If you have any that you're particularly interested in, I can have my staff get back with your staff and tell you what the projected timeline is.
Okay. And then also, you said you were doing a review of the state active duty system overall, and what do you anticipate to be the timeline on that evaluation?
There's several components to it. The rewrite of the regulation will likely take us about 6 months, because we want to make permanent, lasting change. We want to be able to test it through either anecdotes or an actual operation. We went through this process about 5 years ago, and it took us about a year, but we had a much more acrimonious command climate. I think we can move things more swiftly now. So 6 months to get that one done.
So in other words, if we asked you to come back here in 6 months or so, we should be able to give us some update
Absolutely.
on these things. Thank you.
Would you care to finish, or did you?
I just wanted to close my comments by reiterating, again, I'm very much looking forward to working with members of both bodies in order to continue to improve the National Guard. And as I said, I've directed my staff to be very, very forthcoming and work with you to share information on what we're doing, what challenges we still have, because there still are numerous challenges that we're going to take on, but we're going to get through all these.
I have a few more questions, if I may.
Yes, Senator.
You mentioned that you generally have a situation that you lose money when you go to a federal job. And my question is, why then have differential pay agreements with CAL FIRE? Any thoughts on that?
Could you restate the question, please?
You mentioned earlier when you go to a federal,
Right.
you lose money.
Right.
And yet, your CAL FIRE agreements, you have differentials in pay. Any reasons for that?
Well, those, first of all, I've suspended that provision of our regulation so that we can review that if it, to ensure that it is actually something that we need, it's ethical to do, and the reasons, the evolution of why it came about. That fire pay differential was an evolution of a process that began over 30 years ago, where the allied fire agencies, U.S. Forest Service, CAL FIRE, I think it was CDF at the time, CAL FIRE, and the Bureau of Land Management entered into a four-party agreement with the California National Guard in order to us make commitments to respond to them for wildfire support. Part and parcel of that agreement was this notion that they introduced that the National Guard members could waive their state active duty pay when ordered to state active duty, whether they were full-time state active duty or part-time state active duty, and instead just get paid on the fire pay scale. So the military department didn't even pay the soldiers and airmen fighting these fires. The pay was done by either CAL FIRE or U.S. Forest Service, depending on which kind of fire they were supporting, a federal one or a state one. Recently,
What's the difference between a federal and a state fire?
the fire doesn't know the difference, but the response agency, it depends on if it's on federal land or state land.
Thank you.
Sometime, I'm going to say in the last 10 years, I don't know exactly, we determined that, and I believe this is a proposal by CAL FIRE, came back to us and asked us to continue to administer the bulk of our pay, and then they would reimburse us the difference between what their firefighters, what the differential pay and what our soldiers were making on their military pay versus what they made on fire pay. I think the rationale behind this was, at the time, was a soldier was assuming the same risk standing next to a firefighter doing the same job. Why not pay them the same? Well, I have a different philosophy, and the approach that I've directed my staff as we rewrite that provision of our regulation to instead say, well, the military has, we're supposed to get paid just like the federal active duty military. And the military has a provision if you're doing something dangerous, and those are things called flight pay or hazardous duty pay. Not combat pay, because this isn't combat, but there is a provision for hazardous duty pay. So what I told my staff to do is that if we have people out there truly doing something hazardous, not sitting in a cubicle at the headquarters, and just because a fire is going on that they think they get hazardous duty pay or fire pay, but actually out on the front lines exposing themselves to risk of life or limb, then we should continue adopting a provision to pay them hazardous duty pay. It will be significantly less money than the fire pay.
Now, General, let me ask you, the test there would be one for looking forward or looking back? And I'm saying is your explanation is good, and I'm just trying to figure out if you're paying somebody for hazardous duty, is that a determination or test you make before you send them out, or after?
Oh, it should be made before they go out, that as they're going out the door, if you're, and we'll have to work through the provisions of this, but what I envision is something that if you are actively deploying forward to a fire base or you're actively flying missions, then you would be eligible for that pay. But if you are, it's it would not be too much different than the way that we make decisions on combat pay. When you deploy to Iraq or Afghanistan, you get combat pay as soon as you set foot on the ground in country. It doesn't matter whether you're a clerk or an airborne ranger. Everyone draws combat pay because everyone's at risk. So we'll adopt that model, except using hazardous duty pay rather than combat pay, in order to address this issue.
And my question is not one of, got you, but rather one that I do believe you need clarification for all the folks under your command so that people know how to make these decisions and, as you've said, provide the proper leadership and the tone. And as a lot of us here in the legislature, I think, are trying to get our arms around a lot of these issues, and a lot of it is semantics as well. So I just want to make sure that those folks out there that work and operating in good faith are essentially given the clear guidelines to be able to execute in good faith and not get caught up in unintended consequences.
Yes, sir, I agree wholeheartedly. One of the problems with our regulation is there's no anecdotes. There's no little sidebars that give examples. So here's the regulatory that's written in its lawyerese, simplified for infantrymen like myself. But it would be, what I've directed is that then we write little vignettes off to the side that give the common examples, so it's very, very clear, so there can be no question that what we intended in the regulation and then how it should be put into effect.
Thank you. Senator Liu.
Yes, let me follow up on Senator Correa's question about the differential with the CAL FIRE. And I'm looking at March 15th, 2011 document from the Military Department Internal Review Office. And this is what they say. They say that they found 95 state active duty members violated internal policies by completing 2 separate reports for duty documents, 2 timesheets for the same duty day. As a result, the members inappropriately received a total of $286,556 in dual excess compensation. So I have 3 points. So it looks like it's not just a differential. They were actually filing 2 timesheets. So they were getting paid by, I guess, CAL FIRE and then paid by the state active duty simultaneously. And that seems to be beyond just a differential issue. And the second thing the report notes is, I think you noted, you had folks doing, processing payroll documents that also got a bump up in their differential. And my question is, are those folks are you going to recoup the money back from those folks? And then third, you had some folks that were receiving travel reimbursements. One guy got $41,560 to commute from his home to headquarters during that period. And just wondered if you thought that was proper or not, that the employees would get these travel reimbursements for doing these things.
Yeah, those preliminary, those audit reports are all preliminary. I've been briefed on them, but I haven't read them yet. And I deliberately have not read them because I don't want to color the auditors and their outcomes until they come up with their complete findings and recommendations. But I will address some of those, the issues anecdotally. On the first one of the dual timesheets, there are 2 issues within the fire pay issue. One is the issue of differential pay, which our regulations clearly authorize. The fire services and all their lawyers clearly agreed that it was legal. And that's why the department did it. What I am now questioning is whether or not it's the right thing to do. So beyond the legality of it, and is there a better way that we can have a system, as we already discussed, to compensate our soldiers when they're doing something dangerous in the service of the state? The issue of full-time state active duty members doing their full-time job and simultaneously, it's not a question of whether or not they filled out 2 timesheets. Because if it was appropriate for them to do, they'd have to fill out 2 timesheets because they'd have to, in effect, go on leave from their state active duty job. So they have to code themselves in a leave status from their state active duty job in order to go on to this fire pay status. I don't think that's what the question is. The question is pointing at the broader, or the more important question is whether or not it was appropriate for those full-time state active duty people to collect fire pay either in lieu of or in addition to their SAD pay, and that's what the audit is looking into. And if they run, when the audit runs its course, if they find that that activity was improper, then we will take the appropriate action, whether it's recoupment of funds or up to and including UCMJ action if someone did something maliciously.
And then the travel reimbursements?
On the travel reimbursements, I am aware of, in general, of what the allegations are, but I'm waiting to see the full audit and the final findings before I get involved in taking any decisions.
And with your permission, Mr. I have to catch a flight, so can I ask another question?
Please.
So this is an audit on the travel reimbursements that I'm looking at from October 15, 2010. And what it looks like the audit found was there were numerous violations of state regulations and misappropriation of state funds, which prohibit employees from receiving payments for commute travel. And so all these employees are getting all sorts of money for commuting, basically, to headquarters. One was from Douglas, one was from San Diego, one was from San Mateo. And at the end, the recommendations to the military department were to immediately terminate all verbal and written agreements for reimbursement of commute travel of any kind, require each employee to reimburse the state for all travel costs associated with commuting from their home to headquarters, and then implement procedures basically to make sure this doesn't happen again.
Right.
Have those things been done? 2 of the
3 have. The agreements that they were paying these people travel pay is terminated. What I don't know is whether or not those 3 people still work for us, but I do know that we've terminated their travel pay if they do still work for us, and I'm certainly hopeful we terminate it if they don't work for us anymore. The third issue about implementing the regulations or procedures to ensure it doesn't happen again is first and foremost is we suspended any notion that we're going to do that pending a review and rewrite to find out what is appropriate and what is not appropriate so that we're doing things in accordance with the state law and with State Controller's Office guidance. The second thing on the recoupment of the pay is our staff is waiting for the final audit report. Then they'll do their analysis to determine what, if any, is appropriate to recoup. But again, as I said before, if people in our department got money inappropriately from the federal government or the state government, whether they did it willfully or not willfully, we're going to collect the money back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lynn.
Thank you.
Safe travels.
Thank you.
Speaking about travel, along those same lines, the issue seems to be location of an individual in the area of work. I think that's what caused a lot of these issues, and I'm not sure whether that's something that, intentional, or somebody in Nevada working in Sacramento, whether that was something that was supposed to be temporary or it got out of control. And I'm sure your investigation will hopefully shed some light on some of these issues. A more fundamental question is when you hire a state active duty position, if you already have a civil service position there. So duplication of a position, I think, is more of a fundamental issue. When it comes to management, the others travel, the other thing seems to spring from a more basic, which is, are you hiring duplication of personnel, and where are you setting them up? I think once you make those decisions and they're not well thought out or not well planned, then that's when you get into the other issues. So I don't know if you can now, but I would ask you, is there a criteria for deciding to create duplicate positions? Are you looking at costs? What would be cheaper? And obviously, a question that would flow from these would be, is there a scenario where a soldier would be hired to augment their retirement formula?
First, on the duplicate positions, what would be more common, and matter of fact, we're working as part of our full-time manning. I've given directive to our subordinate leaders to, as they manage their personnel resources, to look at what is the best tool for the job, given the 7 employment systems that I mentioned earlier. And in some cases, I believe that we have state active duty people performing functions that would be more appropriate to have either federally reimbursed or a person in a federal status doing that job, to use those state resources more clearly targeted at the missions of the military department, the roles of the military department that are purely state in nature or predominantly state. So we're already starting to move people around to do that kind of thing. The duplication would be more common in the situation where we hire a state active duty person or even a state civil servant to do something that the federal government resources the National Guard to do. So we're taking a hard look to ensure that we always exhaust our federal resources first before we turn to our more limited and precious state resources to get a job done. That's the first thing. I think a more common practice that happened in the past wasn't too common, but it was problematic, was where you would have a state civil servant that was serving generally in an administrative role and was a very effective employer subordinate, and a benevolent boss would invite them to join the State Military Reserve, which doesn't have a basic training requirement or anything like that. They do now. They have some basic trainings, but back then you pretty much just had to go down to the military clothing sales store, buy a uniform, raise your right hand and swear into the State Military Reserve, and you're instantly a soldier in the State Military Reserve with no military training, no background, no nothing. They would then convert that person's job from state civil service to state active duty in-house with the stroke of a pen and give them a huge pay raise to do the exact same job. We don't do that, and we won't do that anymore. All of our positions we work with through now with DPA, Department of Finance, and State Controller's Office, and their oversight if we convert any positions from state active duty to state civil service or the other way around.
So it sounds like you would hire again a state active duty individual when you already have an existing employee there, because
well, we wouldn't do that because we're limited by the number of personnel years. So we would not hire a state active duty person coincident where we already have a state civil servant doing the same function. I think what the past practice was, occasionally leaders would change a state civil service person to state active duty by placing them in the military reserve. And we're looking at provisions. First of all, we just stopped doing that. But we're looking at provisions in the regulation to ensure that we codify that to make it against the regulation to create a shake and bake soldier that has not gone through one of the federal military processes or has more tenure in state military reserve.
you would do that, yet according to this October 15, 2010 audit, it seems that is exactly what occurred.
I'd have to see what specifically they're talking about, because I don't understand. I wouldn't understand what they're talking about within our department. I mean,
if you could have your staff review that and we'll talk.
Yeah.
Please. Second, you said you're no longer having state civil services to state active duty transformation. How many were actually done? How many of these conversions took place? Do you know?
I don't know the total number the department's done. The only one that I have any personal knowledge is the one that I did myself. So I did one. I think that there are areas that are ripe for conversion, for example, within our facilities arena. Matter of fact, I was touring Camp Roberts yesterday, and I noted on their organizational chart that they had a few state active duty heavy equipment operator positions, which were, I'll call legacy positions that existed long. They have been, or they told me they've been converting those positions to SCS, and I directed that they take a hard look at those positions, that when the incumbents in those positions retire or move on to other jobs, that we re-announce those as state civil servants. So there are some low-hanging fruit that we can begin conversions. But I will tell you that one of the premises of that audit that came in is that the default setting for the military department should be that positions should be state civil service first and foremost. I don't necessarily agree with that premise. The military department does have many functions that are inherently military in nature, and I'm not saying that we need to all be uniform people, because our state civil servants provide tremendous value to the department and provide tremendous capability, and there are many, many benefits to having state civil service. But when we evaluate positions, as we discussed before, I think they're going to fall into three general categories. There are positions that are inherently military in nature that are no question that must be military. Then there are questions that there's no question that they should be state civil servant, because they're jobs that there is a state civil servant, civil service classification that exactly exists to do that job. Those positions should be state civil service. There are a few positions, though, that I would call gray area positions, where in the interest of the department and getting the mission done, the leadership needs to take a look at whether at that particular point in time is it better to have a military person or a state person. For example, in our comptroller shop, historically the comptroller of the department has been a military person because they bring a military mindset to analyzing the way that we're spending our state's money in accomplishing our missions. It's also beneficial because having military people serve in our comptroller's office grooms them and trains them as they move up to become chiefs of staff or general officers. They have a good grounding in our state's budget process that they would not otherwise get in the National Guard. However, right now, the right person at the right time, because of experience and the needs of the departments, is a state civil servant. So we have a state civil servant performing that function. So that's one of those positions that will flip back and forth depending on the needs of the department at the time. But in the main, it is fairly easy to determine whether they fall into the category of must be military or must be state civil servant. The problem is the department hasn't always done that, and they haven't had a hard and fast calculus. We do now, in our current in our current state active duty regulation, we have criteria that a job must get analyzed by which in order to determine if it's going to be state active duty. And if it doesn't meet those criteria, then it's going to be state civil service.
So state active duty in a position, the nexus would be, I guess, the skill, and would that be the nexus there?
For state active duty?
Yes.
It's I'll just summarize what the regulation says. It's military, inherently military duties, that they have an emergency response function that requires a uniformed military member. It's a job that has to be subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice. There are jobs where they may have to carry a weapon or be armed with military weapons. They may have to have a military security clearance, and there's a couple of other criteria that escape me right now. But we can get your staff a copy of that provision of the regulation. And our rule now that we're enforcing pretty strictly is when a incumbent vacates a state active duty position, before we re-announce that state active duty position, we send it to a review panel that reviews that position, and state civil servants sit on this review panel. We review the job description to see if it meets those criteria. If it does not, we convert the position to state civil service.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Yamada.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I wanted to return just a moment to, the proposed legislation about the independent inspector general. But while that is, in process, I wanted to ask you, and I know you've been in your position all of, about a month now, or a little over a month?
44 days.
But who's counting, right?
Yes, ma'am.
For any soldier or anyone within your organization that might be listening to this hearing or eventually reading about it or watching it, how, and I know it takes time to build trust. I actually served as a investigator at the federal level for several years in another time in my career. And it sometimes takes a while to establish that trust and that ability for you to enjoin someone in telling you what's been going on for sometimes a very, very long time. What would you say now is the process for someone who has information that might be helpful to all the multiple audits and the other investigations that are going on? And I know that they have been ongoing for some time, but you're supposed to represent, and you do represent, the breath of fresh air. New governor, new adjutant general, new time, other legislative encouragement in process. But how would someone confidently come forward right now to tell additional information that might be helpful to you? And what guarantees? People are very afraid, frankly, to come forward when there are no whistleblower protections. Really, we always say there are,
right,
but things happen. So what would you say in answer to that question?
First and foremost, if there's soldiers and airmen serving under my command, I have an open door policy, and the civilians too. And if they have a grievance that they feel that they may be retaliated against and don't have confidence in their chain of command, they can come tell me about it, and I will look into it. We also, as I mentioned before, have our federal inspector general system that has regulatory and statutory obligations on the federal side to protect whistleblowers, and then also our state inspector general in the state military department operates by the same code. Yes, ma'am.
I would say to follow up that there's still, based on some of the information that are in these audits, that the issue of whistleblowers and proper protections, I think, is still an issue, whether it's an actual or one that is perceived to be. The perception, I think, is probably going to carry. So I would encourage you to address that question and make sure that whistleblowers come not only to us here in the legislature, but to you as well.
Yes, sir, and I think that we influence that. As I mentioned before, I keep coming back to the notion of leadership is that once we restore the confidence of the soldiers and airmen that their leaders are effective, they're caring, and they're ethical, then the soldiers and airmen will start going back through their chain of command to resolve problems rather than going outside.
Thank you. Further questions from the committee? Go ahead, Dr. Pan.
First of all, thank you so much for your military service as well as your leadership. One thing, again, someone who's I'm brand new to the legislature. Haven't served in the military. I was in the public health service very briefly, but I'm just out of curiosity because I know that certainly the National Guard plays an extremely important role in our state in helping support not only our federal military but also addressing many of the disasters, and you indicated that we are one of the more effective, if not the most effective state, and often responding quickly. What is the interface between, I guess, like the National Guard and state active duty folks, and we have police, we have CHP, right, statewide, CAL FIRE, and certainly you've had active military service. How do you see? And I realize this is a little different than what we've been talking about. I'm just trying to understand how this one can argue, is fighting a fire, how similar is it to a firefight in Afghanistan? In other words, yes, military training has a lot of uses, and certainly, and also the emergency response capability of the National Guard is certainly very helpful, not just helpful, but very important to the state, and we have a lot of natural disasters and so forth. But I'm also trying to think, what is how do those translate in terms of, you talked about people needing, military experience, to me, which is about defending our country and fighting, enemies, usually foreign. Domestic, I usually think it's more police, although, certainly we can talk. But, how I'm just trying to figure out the role of the National Guard in relation to our other state agencies that also have to deal with natural disasters and other things. So, and where's the particularly the state active duty folks fit into this whole picture in relation to emergency versus military, working with the federal government and supporting our, federal military.
What the National Guard provides to the people of California at the call of the governor is unique military capability that's not resident in any of our civilian agencies or organizations. Or if there are similar or like capability, we can reinforce that capability for some assets that they need help with. With the military also brings is a very disciplined approach to planning and a very, very disciplined and effective approach to executing and conducting operations. So much to the point that the civilian emergency response agencies have adopted, in the form of the Standardized Emergency Management System, a military command and control construct. It's adopted for civilian use, and they have changed some of the things, but they use a very similar staff organization to what we've developed in the military. They use a very similar orders process, and it's a very disciplined approach for how you go taking on a very complex problem like disaster response. Now, within the state active duty system, the reason we're effective in California is that we have full-time state active duty emergency planners resident in our organization at our headquarters and the headquarters of the Army and the Air National Guard and our subordinate field commands, as well as full-time liaisons with California's Emergency Management Agency. So we interact and plan and exercise on a daily basis to prepare for emergencies, which is why, again, our response, our ability to respond is the most effective in the country, because we have people that are dedicated 24/7 to nothing but planning for the California National Guard to respond in an emergency.
I guess in terms of, because in terms, we have other agencies as well. Is it usually the National Guard that takes the lead in responding to emergencies? Or, I'm just trying to figure out the interface between the National Guard as a military organization and we have our fire and we have our, so again, I don't know.
Sorry, I'm sort of, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Actually,
I don't want to answer for the Adjutant General, but what you're, and certainly Dr. Pan, who's a physician, I'm sure, I mean, you're asking all those right questions, is who's really in charge. And SEMS, the State Emergency Management System, actually California was the first state to adopt such a plan, and the feds came along and decided, oh, well, we better adopt NEMS, which is the National Emergency Management System. The only reason I know this is I chaired our local emergency management service agency for multiple counties. But not to answer that question for you, but incident command is very important in managing, and you do participate greatly in what have you ever done Golden Guardian? We're going to have to get, yes. So that's all part of, in fact, you just did a big Delta drill.
Just last week.
Right. But I don't mean to jump in, but I can hardly sit still because it's a favorite. It's actually a favorite subject of mine, is emergency response and the order that people say, oh, well, how did that all get resolved? Because it's relief, rescue, and recovery. So anyway.
Yes, ma'am. I appreciate that. What I would invite you to do is perhaps you can take some time to come visit our headquarters, and we'll go over and visit Secretary Mike Dayton of CalEMA, and we can describe how California responds to state emergency at the state level. Just like all politics are local, all emergencies are local. The locals are in charge. The state resources are in support. The California National Guard and the active military, when they respond to domestic emergencies, are always working in support of the local responders and in this case we do it at the direction of California's Emergency Management Agency, but we are always under the command and control of the governor, and then active forces under the command and control of the president. So our chain of command goes through our military channels. However, at the rubber meets the road level out in the field, our soldiers and airmen work in support of that incident commander who sets the broad objectives, and then we bring in the unique military capability in order to respond to save lives and property. I just want to add one thing also, that that's an important concept about our mission as a National Guard, and the reason we exist as a National Guard, first and foremost, is to be able to respond to state emergencies at the call of the governor. What our state active duty force buys for us in doing that is time, and time during emergencies saves lives. And that's why, because we have a robust planning system, because we have 40% of our state active duty people dedicated in some form to our state emergency response mission, is why we can respond faster, save more lives and property than any other National Guard in the nation.
Well, thank you for your response, and I actually appreciate the invitation. I look forward to talking to my staff about taking a tour. Thank you.
I may want to ask you some questions on hiring practices. How many permanent, I should say non-permanent status state active duty employees exist? Would you know?
No, I'd have to get back to get that answer to you.
Okay.
We have three different types of appointments you can have for state active duty. You can be appointed to a permanent appointment to a permanent position that generally will lead to tenure, and then you're in the actual official career track. It's analogous to, we have on the federal side, the Active Guard and Reserve program, where we get people appointed into that program. It's also analogous on active duty when officers become regular Army officers at a certain point in their career. And unless they went to West Point, if they're ROTC officers, they get access. So they're in the career management system. The second is limited term appointments, and those are for appointments that generally last 1 year. They're to do a specific and discrete function or large-scale project that's going to last 1 year. Those orders have to be renewed. If the need or requirement remains, the person has to be reappointed into the position. The third is a temporary appointment. Those are generally less than 30 days. For example, some of the investigators and auditors we bring on on temporary SAD because they're going to come in for a week to do a quick investigation. That's analogous on the federal side when we order someone to go either do an investigation on federal active duty, or we order someone to go to a special school if they're going to go increase their military skills.
That's a follow-up question I have. That I understand that sometimes due to mission necessity, that the adjunct general, the TAG, may appoint certain positions in a non-competitive manner. Want to know how widespread is this practice?
I don't think I answered your first question. If I could go back to it. You asked about hiring practices for those three.
Right.
For the first two, for limited term positions and for for permanent positions, we always do competitive boards. We make announcements, people apply, their packets get screened administratively, make sure they're administratively correct, and then they go before a board of people senior in rank to them that are diverse boards in that they're made up, they make sure that the ethnic and general diversity of the board are reflective of the candidate pool. In addition, we bring people that are not working in that same function. So if it's an Air National Guard position, we might bring someone over from the Army National Guard to sit on the board so you have a real objective look. And for the most senior positions, we will bring people from outside the agency, like from CAL FIRE or from the governor's office, or even from out of state, in order to sit on those boards. We do the same thing for limited term positions. For the appointments of less than 30 days, we do not require a competitive announcement. We can appoint someone, because it would take too long to hold a board to appoint someone for a 1-week assignment. In answer to your second question on the Adjutant General positions, our regulation allows a discrete number of positions that serve as a member of the governor's personal staff, I'm sorry, not the governor, the Adjutant General's personal staff, or certain command positions where the Adjutant General has the authority to directly appoint people into those positions. Historically, the Adjutants General have been able to use that to appoint people off the street into positions. I have used that authority as the Adjutant General to redirect people that are already on state active duty for lateral moves into other assignments, but I will not use it for off-the-street hires, even though the regulation allows it. What that does is it allows the Adjutant General to select and pick their personal staff of the people that work, the closest advisors and things like that, in the interest of saving time and without going through a competitive process. I believe a competitive process is a very healthy approach, and I think you get better results when you open the field, because sometimes the person you're looking at may not be the best person out there, and you might get surprised.
So, again, coming back to the non-competitive, it could be the call of either the Adjunct General or the State Active Duty Management Council?
On whether or not to announce the position?
For non-competitive position, to fill it.
The only person that has the authority for a non-competitive announcement is me as the Adjutant General, and I'm limited by the regulation to only list those positions that are listed in the regulation. And by the way, when we did that regulation rewrite a couple of years ago, the list was about 4 times longer of positions that could be non-competitively appointed to. We reduced it to a very, very small number. For example, an example would be the staff judge advocate. Another example would be my personal aide would be amongst those positions. I've opted to not make my personal aide a state active duty. I found a federal resource to do that, and even though I can command direct someone into that position, I've chosen to competitively announce it, because I just think you get better results.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. So you said that would be called by the council?
No, by the Adjutant. Only the Adjutant General has that authority.
Okay. And you said call it. Is that same thing as filling it? Are you using those terms synonymously?
I don't know what I said. Effectively to fill it. I would only
to fill it. That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Appoint someone into it. Right.
Okay. On that council, who makes up that council that fills or calls these?
The Adjutant General appoints the members of the council. They include the Director of State Personnel. We would have chiefs of staff from the Army Guard and the Air Guard, and then representation from the state civil service workforce.
And that representative from the state civil workforce would always be part of that, or just the others?
Well, we always put someone from, not for the hiring boards, but for the state active duty management council. For hiring boards, it depends on the position, and the Director of State Personnel appoints people to the hiring boards based on the rank of the position that's being hired to.
Other questions from the committee?
And this is all without taking a drink of water, so I think it's pretty good.
General Baldwin, I want to thank you very much for your time and want to do this again soon, follow up some of these questions and again, progress reports. I'd like to open it for public comment if there's any folks from the public that would like to make a comment today. Going once? Very good. We're going to move then to some closing remarks if we can. Members of this body would let me like to make some comments. Colonel? Or Doctor? The Colonel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, General. I know it's been a grueling, long afternoon, and every time we have these hearings, I've got to admit I learn more about the National Guard because my thinking is somewhat skewed to the other side of the aisle. And you know, we've had hearings before, and this is perhaps, at least my interpretation, one of the biggest problems is where is it the active duty side and where is it the state side? And unless these procedures, these SOPs, these regulations are spelled out, we can have problems, and I think that's why we're having these hearings right now, and why we've had some of these issues leading up to us. So, at least from my perspective, it's very, very important that, based upon what happens in the audits and the investigations, that perhaps one of the most important things are going to be these recommendations that come out of there. And I think we'll also be interested in recommendations from you based upon, we haven't given you much time. You just took over, and already it's, what are you going to do about this, this, and this, and this? Well, you know, it goes with the territory, and when there's a storm on the horizon, you got to do something about it. So we're very, very interested. I think all of us. There's obviously legislation going in terms of an independent IG, whatever term you want to use, another set of eyes, so that we do delineate exactly the rules of certain things. Because if it's not spelled out, we're going to have problems, and it's always a problem when you have pay and promotions. And that's where my 26 years in the Marine Corps, that's always where things go wrong. So obviously I think we've got a major rehaul that's in order. We're going to need your input. These recommendations that will come forward, even your suggestions on legislation, and I'm sure we're going to have some of our own on how we're going to correct this. This is a very, very tough problem, I think, when you always have these dual roles, and it's been exacerbated by the conflicts in the Middle East, where in the past maybe you weren't called upon to do that the federal actions, it was primarily concerned or associated with state activities. But you know, that's the world we live in. I think that you're going to be called upon for more of this, because even at the national level with budget restrictions, there'll probably be a drop in end strength, and the National Guard and reserve units are, you know, the problem, if it is one, you've answered the call in the past decade, and you've done it very, very well. So you're going to get more of these commitment requests, not just from the state of California, but obviously from the feds. So our job here, I think, is clear cut. We got to make sure we correct some of these errors in recruiting and double dipping. You know the whole story, and we spell out exactly the rules and regulations, so it's crystal clear what has to be done. Thank you very much for testifying today.
Thank you, sir.
Other members?
Well, I do want to thank you for your time and your testimony today and helping to outline your direction and what you're trying to do in your first essentially month and a half. Certainly I think that as Colonel Cook mentioned, you have a tall order in front of you, as well as for the I think for the whole department, and certainly we'll be very interested in the follow-up. Certainly, I think that especially in this time where we're fighting, still fighting two wars, that we certainly respect very much the service of people who've been in combat in the military, and also certainly the work that the National Guard is doing not only overseas but here in our state. But I think that at least certainly recent reports about a culture that does not seem to indicate there's accountability, particularly at the higher levels of the organization, I think undermines public support. I am sure it doesn't have a very positive effect within the organization either. And so certainly I'm eager, and I'm sure other people here as well, to work with you to try to see what we can do to help both support you, but also ensure that there's accountability to the citizens of California, so that people feel confident that our state is doing what it needs to do, that we still retain the effectiveness of our National Guard and its many duties, but also that the leadership is one that we can all feel confidence in, both inside and outside the department. So I look forward to hearing more from you and watching your efforts, and certainly wish you every success in doing so.
Thank you, Doctor.
Ms. Atkins.
Senator, thank you very much to both of you. And General, I just want to apologize for having to come and go other committees, but I want to say how much I appreciate all the information that staff provided. Like Dr. Pan, as a new Assembly member, I found this quite interesting to delve into all of the ways the active duty and civilian positions work. So. And because I had to come and go, I did not want to jump in with questions that I think my colleagues might have already asked and take up your time in that way. But I appreciate the comments that I started to hear at the end in terms of the different positions and permanent and temporary. And, I have looked at this. I'll look forward to hearing from you in the future. You obviously have a tall order. Being new to the appointment and the position, and I wish you the best of luck. As referenced in the number of audits or investigations that are ongoing, I want to make sure you know I am interested, and I will certainly give it the time necessary. Appreciate that you're here today and the comments of my colleagues since I was back and forth. But I do want you to know that I appreciate your pulling this together, and I hope there will be another one at an appropriate time when we actually have the ability to look at what the General has been able to do since he has come to us so early in his tenure. And so I appreciate the work that you've put into this. And I'll look forward to hearing from you again.
Before I make my concluding remarks, I just have one question, and that is you have a timeline for getting the state active duty payroll records that we'd requested in the past. Yes,
I'll find out.
You find out.
We'll get them to you expeditiously. I guess that's the best way to put it. So I'm not sure the scope of the amount of how many documents you've asked for. If it's thousands, it will take some time. If it's just on a few people, we'll do it very, very quickly.
Probably tens of thousands, but we'll work something out. But it is important that Ms. Yamada?
Oh, I didn't want to interrupt your. Are you doing
but
your
you
final?
Did. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I just wanted, before you did your final remarks, I just wanted to make one last comment, and that is, all of us who come to public service in the different pathways that we have chosen, for me, it's now 37 years that I've been working in some arena in public service, but I think what gives me pause the most about this particular time is the erosion of public trust in all of our institutions. And I could just sort of tell by watching you sitting there that I think you're the type of person that would rather be out running around right now trying to help restore that public trust. So I know that we are going to be hearing from you again. But, with that, as I say, I think that's the greatest concern that I have right now is all of our institutions and who's going to come forward to help us sustain, rebuild and sustain that trust. We are at a very precarious time, I think, in our nation's history for so many reasons, and I just hope that we can encourage that restoration. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any further comments? And let me go ahead and conclude in saying that we do look forward to getting that information as well as other information required here today and before this committee and, of course, later after this committee hearing. I must confess that I do have a soft spot, or rather probably admiration and respect for those men and women who serve in uniform. I like to call them citizen soldiers and volunteers in a regular army. Still have the best in the world, and yet regulars volunteer and the rest are citizen soldiers. So again, I do have an admiration and respect. I trust that you're the right person to do the job, to provide the leadership, to establish that new paradigm, to regain that trust and shine that is appropriate for all those men and women in uniform. Yet I also believe not only in trust but also in verify, and we'll be here as a committee to make sure that we help you, assist you in doing your job, and verify for the public that in fact the job has been accomplished. And with that, I'd say it's more of a partnership as opposed to anything else. So I thank you and your staff for your time today, and we will set up another hearing very shortly to continue to follow up on these issues. And I thank you very much, sir, and welcome to the legislature again.
Thank you,
Thank you
Senator.
very much. With that being said, this committee hearing is now adjourned.